we're going to find not only issues of gender or women's roles versus men's roles, but really quite different reception histories in both Judaism and Christianity. So if Marc wants to start with the Hebrew.
Here, the Hebrew is less significant. I just want to point out a few things about this particular text in the Hebrew. Number one, in the Bible itself, in Hebrew Bibles, there's no little heading over this that says something like the fall of man or original sin. Those are inserted in Bibles on the basis of interpretation. And they're much more frequently used in Christian Bibles than they are in Jewish Bibles. And it's very, very important to distinguish between what the text actually says and between what people who like to gloss those texts gloss them as saying. Secondly, and if you were to look at the other verses surrounding this, you'll see that I am not lying in this particular case. There are three entities that God speaks to. There is the serpent or the snake. We make him sound fancier by being a serpent, but he simply is a snake. There's the snake, the man, and the woman. With the snake, the Hebrew root aror, or Hebrew word aror, to be cursed, is used, where the serpent or snake himself or itself is cursed. I don't know if that snake is masculine, feminine, or both. They're androgynous, to come back to AJ's previous point. In relation to the man, arura ha'adama, the land, the earth is cursed. Very often people speak of the curse of the woman, but look at this verse, whether in Hebrew or in English. The word curse is missing here. And what this verse talks about, from my perspective, is not that women who previously gave birth painlessly are now going to have terrible birth pangs in a pre-epidural world, but rather, once you separate the first and the second creation story, I believe, and both AJ and I discussed this in the Bible, With and Without Jesus, that as a result of eating from this tree, people become sexual. They're then going to have children. And what the first part of this verse says, yeah, you're going to have kids. And in a world before modern medicine, that is going to be painful. And what the next part of the verse says is, so you might want to think that you're going to avoid this pain by not having any children. Not so fast. This is speaking to the woman, yet your desire shall be for your husband. And this last statement, at least I understand, other people understand it somewhat differently. This is a general hierarchical statement. Contrast Genesis chapter 1, which is male and female. He created them, no hierarchy. But here you have, and he, the husband, shall rule over you, the wife or the woman. So again, one of the reasons that it's so important for me to separate these two stories is once you read them as distinct, you're able to see certain things that would not be so evident if you read one in the light of the other. But that is all, maybe all should be in scare quotes, that this verse says about what God says to the woman. But this verse in particular is going to be greatly magnified in both Jewish and Christian tradition, as AJ is going to discuss.
What a nice segue. There's an alternative way of reading this particular text, and it's a matter of translation. So if you go midway through the first line, you've got itzvonech, and the next to the last word on that first line is be'etzev. So etzev actually gets used in the next verse to talk about the man who with toil will bring forth agricultural concerns. So do we translate this pain, which is a legitimate translation, or do we say, I will greatly anticipate, increase. It's a great formulation, harba arba. I will greatly anticipate increase your workload, your toil, your labor. Along with labor, you will bring forth children. I'm following here Carol Myers, professor emerita now at Duke University, where Marc teaches, who wants to read this as to say, it's kind of like the second shift, that women will still have to work in agriculture, and they'll still have to do textiles and pottery and cooking. And along with all the labor that women do, they're also going to have to do pregnancy and childbirth and lactation and childcare. So if we want to talk about what's happening here with this woman, she's now got more work to do, and she's going to increase that workload because she's still going to wind up producing children. So if we read this idea of the curse, the word is not used, of the woman, and then we go to the man, we get a different idea of the labor. And what kind of labor are we talking about? And since the curse regarding the man is on the land, that it no longer will bear forth fruit easily, as in the Garden of Eden, where you can just peel me a grape or pick an apple or whatever. Because we now have various aids to agriculture, so men don't have to work that hard, then maybe we should look at this verse in Genesis chapter 3:16 and say, well, why should women have to work that hard? And why is this curse, quote unquote, usually accrued to women? And the reason it is not so much because of the Hebrew Bible, because after these first couple of chapters of Genesis, Eve disappears and Adam isn't so popular either. But when we get to the New Testament, we get major concerns about Eve and what she does. So in the New Testament, if we go to the first epistle of Timothy, usually ascribed to St. Paul, probably written by somebody in Paul's name, what First Timothy says is, well, the woman wasn't created first, but the man was. As opposed to seeing the woman as the epitome of creation, she comes in as a bit of an afterthought. And First Timothy goes on to say the man was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor. So this particular reading of Genesis says, Eve did not deceive the man by tempting him. Oh no, Adam was such a mensch, such a decent guy, that when Eve had that bite of fruit and then gave up the possibility of immortality, the man, out of solidarity with his wife, takes that fruit and eats in true knowledge. What a mensch. But because he was not deceived and she was deceived, then women are not to teach or have authority. So the story of the Garden of Eden here is read in the New Testament as fully subordinating all women as daughters of Eve. Their fate is determined by what Eve does. And First Timothy finishes this little passage by saying, women shall be saved. The NRSV, I think, says by childbearing. But what it really means is they will be saved by bearing children. And that's another way of looking at Genesis chapter 3, verse 16. In the Hebrew, your desire shall be for your husband. In other words, you're still going to have children, even though you'll have pain and you'll have more labor, with labor meant in various ways. What First Timothy says is you have to have babies. In fact, having babies is requisite for your salvation. And why is First Timothy saying that? Because in the second generation and third generation of the followers of Jesus, particularly in the Gentile world, celibacy and continence and virginity were becoming increasingly important. And a number of women who were followers of Jesus were saying, I don't want to have any children. I don't want to get married, particularly in the upper classes where you marry for economic concerns rather than for love. I don't want to be married. I don't want to have these pains. I don't want to have this additional labor. And First Timothy, being to use a more modern term, bourgeois type of text, basically says, ladies, get back into your husband's bed because that is your duty, and you know that is your duty, because that's how you gain salvation, and that's what Genesis teaches.
Fascinating use of the ancient text there. Well, I think we've gone to a number of contemporary debates as well as ancient texts and medieval interpretations. And now we even have the whole question, which I think is still current in various Christian churches, about celibacy and so forth.
What Bible do you read? And how do you know it's the right one? There's only one version of the Bible, right? It might surprise you to learn that Bible translations led to many versions of Holy Scripture. Long ago, translators interpreted the Hebrew Bible, ensuring it would be enjoyed in many languages. But when they encountered Hebrew words they didn't understand, translators relied on their individual cultural context and used different words with different meanings unrelated to the original ones. This led to Bible versions that lacked the full, beautiful, original explanations becoming part of our history. That's why when you join our online classes, you'll get back to the source of the original Hebrew Bible to uncover hidden meanings.
Get back to the source. Join our online course today, where the treasures of the authentic Bible await you.
Click on the link and register to start your biblical experience.